everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on startup and impact investment. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Eric and Mr. David Smith. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Eric.
So the key about impact funding, a lot of that is coming from other organizations, some of which are nonprofits or, impact companies themselves. But a lot of them have a specific area they are interested in, such as renewable energy or social conditions or improving technology among certain areas or going into developed areas of the world. So, most of these companies that are doing impact funding for startups are trying to get a portfolio of a certain specific area better. And some of the startups they're funding are actually nonprofit organizations themselves. So a nonprofit organization can apply for funding on their portfolio. The other type of funding goes all the way to established companies where, like some of my investment funds only invest in, sustainable companies or companies that have a good corporate social responsibility. So that's the other layer so there's traditional organizations that are focusing on a portfolio of impact companies that are going to have impacts in areas. Other traditional fundings are providing fundings to help them once they get noticed, scale and be invested, especially if they get into the public sector, public companies, on a public stock exchange or something like that. And the other place that's coming up quite a bit is now crowdfunding. So there's a lot of impact companies that are in things like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, where they are designing a product that's either more user-friendly or they're doing some of their efforts to, we're going to make money here and we're going to give back over there. And then others are just companies focused on let's make a change. Let's get rid of this problem. And so they're trying to get money from the average person to fund impact. Then there's investors, which are trying to give their money. Then there's the traditional finance organization, which is getting more in tune to companies that are trying to make a difference. And then the other part of where a lot of this influence for impact comes is just the consumers. Consumers are becoming more aware, and businesses have determined that corporate social responsibility is a great marketing tool for them to say, if you buy our product, we'll plant a tree, or if you buy shoes, we'll give shoes to someone needs it, or glasses. If you buy glasses, we'll give glasses to somebody who needs it. So with this corporate social responsibility, there's a lot more pressure. But what a lot of companies find out is they invest in trying to do the marketing piece. They go, oh, we're saving money and this actually makes sense. And sometimes our employees are more motivated. So let's start this idea of, doing good while doing good business. So I guess I'm sure David has some events, but just ones I've seen. Clean and renewable energy is big. Sustainable agriculture around the area that I'm in is surprisingly growing a lot. They're even doing things like, drones for farming, though a long way to go on that, but just different types of earth and soils and fertilizers and growing vertically. So sustainable agriculture and food systems is a big area where they're doing impact investing. Healthcare and biotech is a big area. Finance tech. If you take things like Kiva, which invests just in regular companies, but the Kiva itself, a funding platform, which allows average people to give you can fund $25. So a lot of financial inclusion and the ability for people to be able to get loans and do businesses and through innovative companies. Social enterprise, a lot of everything you can think of. water and sanitation. And one of the areas that a group I with is working on is the affordable housing and urban development, community development. So those are just a couple areas right off the bat that I've either personally been involved in or know people that are involved in. I'm sure David must have some more. So I'll turn that over as my intro.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith.
Eric, thank you so very much. Yeah, this is an interesting area. It's one that uh, does not have a lot of depth to dive into because it's a fairly recent phenomenon as we look at it and as you introduced, Eric. It's also one that has some mixed results so far. Impact investing, as Eric mentioned, is really looking how to invest either directly or through funds in capital to enterprises that generate social or environmental benefits. And it's very interesting. McKinsey did a recent study on this and actually came back that the 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 urgency of doing this is fairly interesting, particularly after you see things like COP27, which began to divert funds to developing nations for what would be characterized as impact investing today. And there's multiple now investment firms that are offering funds to handle impact investing. Uplink, which is one of the World Economics Forums, uh, was directly formed as part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals out of the Paris Accord to begin to look at that and to begin to make a difference. The Uplink really put out a call for funds to apply to it to be certified as socially conscious investment firms. And they had about 70 submissions, and 17 funds were actually selected as ones which they thought benefited in the area of the call for it, which some of them are client based, some are uh, looking at disadvantaged areas of the world or disadvantaged populations. Um, some are looking at how to uh, directly address things like there's a Blue Ocean Fund as part of that. There is many different ones. And even a couple, one of them called Uniterra, of trying to go back and rectify biodiversity losses. So many different ways that we can go into this topic with where Eric started the introduction and others besides that. But there's a couple of characteristics of this type of investing that really stand out as a whole on it. And one of them really is the intentionality of the actions. Yes, they want to return, but they also want the positive impact of the investment dollars in the area that they're either personally investing in or that the fund is investing in. You know, they want to see if it is looking at sustainability, the impact of sustainability. If it's biodiversity, the impact of the biodiversity. If it is looking at, for example, the one I mentioned with the energy transformation, they want to see that going. The second, though, is they want a more intense reporting than you see in most investment before. They want not only reporting back on the success of their funds, they want them to define the input and the goals, and they want to equal the impact space. So many investors in this are not passive investors like you see in many other areas. They're very active investors who want this type of feedback. And while that sounds great, I can tell you, having run companies with investors and things, it's not as easy as it sounds, particularly in an area such as where many of these uh, investments are being made. An example that is used is one of the impact investment companies is out of is a Dutch company, and they make real meat products without causing harm to animals. It's kind of hard to prove that coming back on it. So you begin to say, how can I begin to do that? How can I structure that back uh, to others? The same thing as you see others that are an impact one trying to provide internet to the vast majority of the world who does not have it. You can begin to see some demonstration, but it's hard for them to show results at a scale. And defining impact at the beginning of any of these is really critical for the success of this type of impact investing. And in impact investing has definitely generational differences too. If you look at the folks across the various generations, there's only two groups that you see really actively investing in this area right now, more than just well, to any significant percentage. Uh, and that I think is going to be one of the defining parts as we begin to see this. The other thing is that social investing is sometimes at odds with the company's goals to generate maximum return for their shareholders, and that has to be balanced as you're going though. And you see that in many different ways, and you see it in the classics like was mentioned by Eric at the start, but you're also seeing them going in places where, for example, affordable housing, sustaining timberland, uh, specialized clinics to serve targeted disease, targeted populations. All of these are places where you see impact investing too. And um, it's clear to see that these carry some higher risk overall. They're less liquid in many instances. They're tougher to exit, but it is one that is growing as you see it. The ability to do the type of diligence that many investors typically do are missing in many of these opportunities. But it's had significant impact in places where it has been utilized. But it's like I said, it's one that is still a niche when you look at it in the overall scheme of investment dollars. So Sharif, that's my kind of introduction to.
Thank you, Mr. Eric.
Yeah, so I think David brings up some great points. I kind of initially talked about where investing can come from, left off a couple sources because I wanted to talk about them later. And then David started painting the other side of the equation, which is, well, yeah, it's good if it happens, but what's the problem? And I think he brought up the first problem is just the perception of, do we want to invest in these things? It's new, it's scary. Gee, I don't know. Uh, and one of those challenges, if they even decide, is handling the risk. And I think David brought up the point is, well, what are the metrics? Investors like metrics. So they're very hard to get metrics of when you succeeded in improving health in this area, especially when you're starting up and you're not even quite sure what you can do. You're more taking a kind of goal. So the measures and metrics can be more challenging for these impact companies than for other companies. The other problem is long lead times. It's not typically the kind of thing where you expect, a 10x growth and go public. And, investors like those in their portfolios. So that's another problem is, return on investment. The other thing can be, lack of a stable market support. Markets grow by forming and communications and resources and supply chains with each other. So one of the challenges in some of these industries is they don't have standards for these things yet. They don't have, industry groups. They don't have communications. They may not have associations. So, is the market part, and that's part of it. And then the consumer part of it is, are consumers going to go with that? So the market demand and potential growth is kind of in question. The stability of the market and resources to support those companies, the long lead time for return on investment, the difficulty in measuring whether you're succeeding or what you want to do. Those are all can be challenges. The other part that I want to talk about is, we talked about a startup saying, gee, I'd like some money. Where can I find somebody to give us that money to do impact-based growth? There's companies that have their own internal startups. I mean, Google, of course, is a famous one where they fund impact investment. Another one that's pretty famous is Patagonia, the clothing. I've got a Patagonia, jacket, and they're pretty much have their own internal investments and growth. There's a lot of them doing renewable energy and solar off-grid stuff. A lot of companies, especially in places like Africa, are doing off-grid stuff. There's a group that I've personally talked to who's doing education, and how do you deliver education to people, with just smartphones, especially in other, so they may not have the computer and all that kind of stuff, but maybe they can get access to a phone, and how do you do education in a way that applies to them? So I guess that's my other take on that. Oh, even companies like IKEA, I think, have things like that. So, the companies have their own internal investments, but they also fund external companies. So some of these companies will actually fund. So that was a source that I left off initially, is companies funding within themselves, and companies who aren't venture groups, funding other efforts that they view are synchronous with what they're trying to do.
You're muted, Sharif.
Mr. David.
Thank you. Eric, I agree with you. The other thing, that might be good at this point is this type of impacting investment has overlaps with many other things we've talked about on prior programs with Dr. Sharif in the past too. So for example, you see opportunities where many different groups and bodies have begun to make microfinance impact funds, which are loans to small businesses in developing countries to target particular areas. You see buying mortgage-backed securities to fund affordable housing for low-income communities, and quite a few others like that. But to look at the broader, larger scale of it, there is differences where you see impact investing versus SRI investing. And if we remember from prior shows, SRI is for socially responsible investing. And this approach looks to put your money in companies that support your values, your moral compass, the things you believe in, while avoiding those that do not. Uh, Compared to impact investing, social uh, responsible investing is generally more exclusionary in nature uh, versus trying to look more broadly like an impact investment might be. For example, a social responsible investing might avoid putting money into oil companies or tobacco companies or gun companies and do that as a class across all of them. Uh, and begin to put that in place there. Uh, so you see that another area where you see impact investing versus others is we've talked on several prior shows with Dr. Sharif about environmental social governance, so ESG, and you see many investors and investment firms targeting environmental, social, and governance ESG type of investment, and they aim to make these investments through rating agencies as opposed to just comparing the broader impact of it. And their focus is more on avoiding poorly scored investments than you see others. Nevertheless, though, there's a lot of impact between these three, where you have the impact investment, the ESG investment, the SRI investing. And there's a lot of overlap and impact, and sometimes they work across purposes with each other. And uh, and understanding that some of the key elements, though, in impact investing is you either with the fund you're trying to invest in, or if you're trying to do this on your own, is you need to define the impact at the beginning, what you really want it to be. Is it just helping to broadly to improve a group, or are you looking at, I want to improve the underrepresented women in this particular segment, or as an example, uh, is it trying to target multilingual capabilities? Is it trying to target uh, improvements to battery technology to enable the transaction? Hydrogen investments today are having a lot of impact investors going into it. So it's really important to define it, but it's equally important to really go and determine up front what role you want to have, what type of reports do you want, how often do you want the reports back. That has been a real sticky point in many of these. One of the big impact investing funds is looking at how to save bees, and that is a really tough one to look at when you're looking at the layers and layers of reporting and what is real information and not real information. Uh, and and you see that happening. Some of the feedback from some of the people who've been making impact investments even before it was even called impact investments is they're wondering whether they're being too narrow, whether they can make a bigger impact by being broader and being able to have that type of view. And that's why you're seeing more and more of these funds, excuse me, cropping up versus individual investments, because they're thinking that in these socially responsible funds that they can leverage others people's money equally with theirs or greater than theirs to have a broader impact, and it's probably uh, correct. So if I was to begin to invest today in socially impact investment, you really need to do some research. You need to learn the nuances of the lexicon in it, because there are nuances with it. And what are sustainable indexes? How does a sustainable index in the EU, in Asia, in the United States differ? You need to begin to talk with others. You need to decide what type of a return you want, because the myth is impact investment typically has lower returns, but you kind of have to balance those out, and you have to really explore it. And there's no saying tip your toes in the water before you get in to see if it's hot or cold. You kind of need to do the same thing with impact investment. You need to get in and try it and see what the outcomes are. So Sharif, I hope this helps.
Thank you, Mr. Eric.
Yeah. So we're actually looking at some of this right now in terms of, like I said, the housing, but you're much more able to be a solution in search of a problem in other areas. Like you've got a way of increasing the performance of um, quantum computing, for example. You have a much bigger chance of doing that outside of impact investing. When you go to impact investing, you often have to have a much clearer view on exactly what change you're going to do. We're going to change, a blindness. We're going to change the ability to do that. So you have to have a much clearer idea of where you want to go and define. And the government, for example, is both really good and bad at that. They're really good at saying, we have this specific problem. We're looking for people who can solve this right now. Let's do this. Let's get it into our systems. But they also fund basic research for that kind of stuff. So that's one place where if you are more, a solution in search of a problem, you can get by with some government funds. The other thing that you can do with a government is you can license some of their technology and apply that to impact. So government is a place that does these general technologies with, sound and air and communications, whatever you think of. And they're only funded to use those to help out their government customers, but there's a lot of non-government customers that may benefit from that technology. So you can actually license that technology and use it for impact purposes. You can also do partnerships with the government where you provide one piece to their piece, and then you have the ability to sell that to non-government people. So the government gets it free and you get it to sell. So there's some other places when you think of where you can go. But one of the problems with impact is investing is if you have this idea of this real technology you want to use and you want to go apply it, as David was saying, a lot of them are very specific of what problem they're trying to solve. So you have to be able to say that my education platform actually does this and it's going to solve the problem. So the problem would be, how do we do this innovative education in places that don't have good communications? You need to be able to answer that question specifically. So while there are a few avenues where you can take these general advancements and figure out businesses, your field is much narrower of people that are trying to solve specific problems when it comes. Because impact investing, they're trying to not fund a technology, they're trying to fund a change and impact something that's there, and again, may be hard to measure. So that would be the other thing that I would look at, is this idea of where do you want to put your focus? If you want to start an impact investing company, where do you want to put your focus? And that's the challenge we're having right now, is trying to take this generally great thing and say, here's specifically why you should fund, because it's going to have this impact.
Eric,
So David
you're
Smith,
right. That's so hard to do, is to quantify those impacts, and not just quantify it, but define what the KPIs are. And I've seen so many people fail in that area. It's going to get harder. You see places where the impacts are trying to look very broadly. Some of them are uh, job creation impacts. Some of them are uh, how do you begin to raise the living wage higher and higher. Some of there are empowerments for all different uh, segments. Some are the growth of small business communities and their social impact factors. Uh, how can you get to a negative carbon footprint, a clean energy generation? I can keep going on and seeing, but how can you produce measurable metrics to uh, impact much of these? Because in some cases, the impact can be so broad that it's really, really hard to see any movement. A 1% movement translates into a huge, huge impact in some of these. In many instances, goes beyond the ability of one company to produce that. So again, there's some best practices in here that I can remember, and I hope I can remember these. But some of the best practices going back are, how do you establish and really put on the table what is a social or environmental or a societal objective on these, and how can you do it? The example I just used a minute ago about the amount of carbon reduction. How can you begin to do it, and what's the time frame? Uh, and how do you put the targets to these, the KPIs and others? And how can you put it? You have some of them. You have, for example, there's a system that's being established to try to talk some of these um, with a global impact rating system. Uh, one called Iris and Iris Plus, trying to begin to impact these. You're seeing others. You're seeing over in UK a sustainable accounting board being stood up to try to put some metrics around this for investors. Um, but you're seeing all different types. You're seeing industry groups coming into it. You're seeing investment funds. You're seeing corporations themselves setting up in their innovation groups this type of investment. Uh, but you have to do some of the same things with these as you do with other types, with having good business plans, with having areas to look at how to do the social impact investment. And there's just many ways that we talked about, Eric and I both, throughout this. You can do this in a fund. You can do this. Increasingly, pension funds are beginning to invest in this area. You're beginning to see wealth managers who are focusing on this. Non-government organizations or family offices, family foundations. You are seeing all types of, for example, religious institutions beginning to develop investment strategies in these areas. And of course, you're seeing individual investors, and the individual investor, unless you are just extremely wealthy, will have marginal input in many of the biggest issues, but particularly if you look at affecting those of you in your community, individual investors can dramatically affect those of you in your community in many instances. So again, it's kind of the scale you want to have of your impact investment, and also the scale you want to go have in the startup community. Many startups are desperately seeking funds today as the funding environment has gotten harder and harder over the last few years for startups. And this is a way for additional funding, but this is also the place where your reporting requirements go dramatically up for startups. I used to talk a lot about mosquito investors. And this is one of the reasons I don't like crowdfunding, Eric, is that oftentimes you get some very small investors who are extremely passionate, which is what impact investment is about, is passionate investors. Um, and sometimes they are so passionate that it's hard for a startup to focus on starting a company, of building a product, of going to market, because you have these small investors, these very passionate investors, sucking the blood out of the company with their wanting reports all the time. They're wanting to see the impact. They're wanting uh, more and more of the day-to-day stuff that's really hard to do because startups don't have large corporate staffs to handle investors. They don't have large corporate staffs to handle public relation and things. So your exact topic today, Sharif, of startups and impact investment are oftentimes are at odds earlier. The technology from a startup might be very, very good for having an impact in the area of the investment. But again, traditionally, at least at the individual level, uh, impact investors are so passionate that I've seen them adversely affect startups.
Yeah, one of the
Mr.
challenges,
Eric.
one of the challenges when you have a lot of investors is somebody say, I paid my $25, I want access, I want. So you get a lot of those people coming in. It's one thing when you have a few investors that you have to pay attention to, but when you get a lot of investors all demanding, attention because they're passionate. But a lot of the ways you get around that is they don't have those investing in the company. They have those investing in a product the company does. So you don't really get a say about the company. They say, what about this new product which does the same thing without hurting the environment? And would you invest in that? So I think, crowdfunding is great for launching new products or services because it gives you feedback whether people really want it. So, you put a picture, you make a video. So I like it for testing the new products, but it's can be a lot more challenging when you say invest in this company and it's going to do lots of great stuff. I think, yeah, that's more problematic in saying let's start a company. I think another challenge that impact companies have is when you're trying to make an impact, a lot of times what you're trying to make an impact in has lots of different areas. For example, you said, oh, we want to solve the homeless problem. Well, great. So how are you going to do that? Well, we are going to help one little piece of mental health. Okay, but what about physical? What about job training? If you help them mentally or physically, they still might not be able to get a job. Okay, so you get them job skills. Um, uh, well, that area may not support, they don't have any housing they could live in. Oh, okay. So we give them affordable housing. Oh, but then they can't keep a job. So when you're trying to bring in all the pieces, homeless has medical, both mental health and physical health. They've got affordable housing. They've got legal issues in there. You've got drug and addictions. You've got that problem. And you've also got a problem when you're doing impact investing of legal risks, where somebody will sue you on the behalf of the people you're trying to help. They don't even have to sue you and say, you're not helping them right, and we're going to pay you. That's what happened with a project we were going to do, is we found a bunch of people were waiting to sue us just because they could, on behalf of somebody else. So it's very difficult sometimes to say how your impact is going to be able to work with all these other things that really need to make that impact go. An example of that is I could find the greatest e-learning tool in the world, and but I need bandwidth to do it. So that means I need to work with the bandwidth providers to do that. But they might have to get permission to build that in. And so impact in companies and investing can be really hard, because to have a real impact, you often have to have more than one piece of the problem working together. And the other thing is, you've got to be able to make money. And sometimes the impact companies are so passionate about what they do, will worry about money later, which is different than a lot of the other companies where people start right in as, how can we make some money? Your chances of getting a, traditional company, founder more interested, very passionate about what they do, but the percentage of people that have more money in there, I think, is greater. I've met a lot of impact people that don't understand the money piece, which can be a challenge also. So I think David is right. Crowdfunding can be tricky, but I think if you're going to fund the company through a product that is there, I think that could be a good way. I think that you often have challenges with an impact because you may not be able to make the whole impact of the problem yourself. You may just be a part of that. That's tough to measure, tough to implement, and you have to think about that. And also, impact companies still have to make money. Even if it's a nonprofit, you still have to make money. And that's a challenge also, is where's the revenue going to come from after your initial investment? How are you going to sustain that? And that's a challenge also.
Eric, the last point you made is particularly important, because many small startups in the impact space, there's a tendency for it to be a lifestyle business because they have the equal passion. And sometimes you see it become a lifestyle because they don't have a desire to make a successful commercial company if they can continue to get the impact investment funds in to serve their passion area as well. So that's one of the areas, as an advisor to a lot of startups I've seen, this can be challenging in, is how do you balance the lifestyle part of it, the internal investment part of it, with the desire to run and scale a successful company. So, Dr. Sharif, those are some of the other challenges you see in the startup community. Are there opportunities in this space? Yes. Are there opportunities to take technology out of colleges and universities and move to this space? 100%. But the startup should realize that as a startup, they need to grow a company first. And as you look at investments, there's always good investors and bad investors. And in this particular space, you need to vet your investors just like your investors are vetting you. It's a two-way process in this area, because the interactions will be more intense than in a normal startup, Sharif. So that's part of the other feedback to you on this.
Thank you. Mr. Eric, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
I think the outlook for impact companies is good. I think companies are seeing that as a good marketing thing. I think the generations coming up, some of them support that a lot more. I think there's a popularity in making a difference with some generations. But I think also right now there's a loss in faith of the government to deliver a lot of these things. So nonprofits and NGOs thrive when people don't feel like the government is going to solve these problems. So somebody else needs to do it. And that's the time for innovators and entrepreneurs to come up and say, here's how we're going to solve some or most critical uh, problems. You know, if power companies may not be excited about getting off the grid people electricity, and the government's not there, you know, who's going to do that? And I think that there is a big potential as more investment. I think part of it is just investors learning how to play the game. You know, it's a different game, and there's money to make. It's kind of like when people did micro lending. People thought that'll never work. It's, you know, people that don't have a lot of money are high risk. They're not going to pay you back, and they can't make that much money. And you know, now micro lending is a big thing and very successful. I think investors are starting to explore this idea of, oh, okay, maybe this is a good area to do, but it's different, and you have to figure that out. So I think as investors get more knowledge and more comfortable with this idea of creating impact, I think as there's a bigger demand and impact from people in general and consumers, and I think as governments are busy kind of trying to keep themselves going right now, and there's less agreement over how do you solve these problems. I think the outlook for impact investing can be good.
Thank you. Mr. David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today?
I almost just want to say ditto to what Eric said. That our view on this are so similar that each of us could do each other's answers, I think. My point on impact investing is that from the investment side, be very clear what you want to do. If I was an investor, I would look more at some of the impact investment funds and go that way to broaden my coverage and have a greater impact potentially. From the startup, I would say continue to produce the technologies, the services, the capabilities you are, but also be wary of overly passionate particularly individual investors. The term I've used and I've heard others use is mosquito investors. Just be careful of mosquito investors in impact investment, because they will suck the blood out of the startup because you don't have the large staff, you don't have the large capabilities. So be diligent with the people you have as impact investors. I know that sounds weird, but I've seen it do more than you've ever seen in harming startups in the past. But Sharif, this is an area that is ripe for innovation. As I said earlier, and Eric repeated there, is there's generations that have bought totally into this and who see it. The X generation very much are impact investors today, as you see their tendencies and their capabilities. I believe we're going to see some more of this as we go forward with others. Sorry, but it's an area that's going to continue to grow. It's an area that, though, is still a segmentation of investing. It's a segmentation of startups, and if you are passionate in these areas, go do it. If you're passionate and you want to make investments in these areas, go do it. But just look at the metrics you're trying to do. look at the reporting cadence, look at the and balance the needs between the investor and the startup, realizing startups have to be commercially viable to really be successful. So, Sharif, that's my concluding comments.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith, and thank you, Mr. Eric, for joining today's session. I request all of our audience please share our content with the government agency, corporation, and academy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye, and take care.
Bye, y'all.